Kolchagino is a small town east of Moscow, 37,000 people, one maternity hospital. In 2023, that hospital delivered 300 babies. 2 years later, 268. Not enough to justify keeping the lights on. So in January 2026, they announced it was closing. The year before, the same thing happened in the next town over, Krystalny, 48,000 people, their only maternity ward, gone. 2 towns, 2 closed maternity wards. That's not a story. Here's the story. When journalists started asking how many towns this was happening in, how many births Russia was actually recording, they hit a wall. Because in the middle of 2025, the Russian government classified its own population data. The census, postponed until 2029, monthly birth statistics, gone from public view. A nuclear superpower, 11 time zones, 6,000 warheads, quietly stopped telling the world how many Russians exist. Governments don't hide good numbers, so tonight, we're going to look at the numbers that leaked out anyway. And what they show is a country consuming its own future from 3 directions at once. Let us start with what we know for certain, because these numbers got out before the blackout. Russia's population peaked in 1994, 149 million people. Today, roughly 145 million, and that's counting annexed territory Russia doesn't fully control. Projections for the end of this century, around 120 million. The Economist called it, in one word, a nightmare. But the total number hides the real damage. Watch the births. 2014, 1.9 million babies born in Russia. 2020, 1.4 million. 2024, 1.22 million, almost exactly tied with 1999, the worst year ever recorded, the year after Russia's economy collapsed and defaulted. Except in 1999, Russia was broke. In 2024, oil money was flowing, and the births kept falling anyway, 3 to 5% every single year, with no recovery projected before 2030. Then, in January 2026, journalists got their hands on non-public Rosstat data. The fertility rate, children per woman, had fallen to 1.37, the lowest in nearly 2 decades, 23% below where it stood just 10 years ago. Some demographers believe Russian birth rates are now the lowest they've been in 200 years. 200 years. That covers Napoleon, 2 world wars, Stalin, the collapse of the Soviet Union, and the fewest Russian babies of that entire stretch are being born right now. In 2024 alone, deaths outnumbered births by roughly 600,000 people. That's a mid-sized city erased from the ledger every single year, before we count a single casualty of war. And here's the thing. For 30 years, Russia had a machine that papered over exactly this problem. In 2025, that machine broke. From 1992 to 2023, Russia recorded 49 million births and 66 million deaths. That's a natural loss of nearly 17 million people, more than the population of the Netherlands, vanished in 1 generation. So why didn't Russia feel it? Immigration. Over those same 3 decades, 12.3 million immigrants arrived, mostly from Central Asia, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan. They filled the construction sites, the farms, the warehouses. That inflow offset almost 3/4 of the entire decline. It was the shock absorber. the one mechanism keeping the bottom from falling out. Now, look at what's happened to it. Before the pandemic, 4.5 million legal labor migrants in Russia. In 2012, as many as 7 million. Today, barely 3 million, and falling. Part of it is opportunity. Workers from Central Asia can now earn more in Poland, in South Korea, in the Gulf, without the risks that come with Russia. And the risks are real. Migrants in Russia have been pressed toward military service. Biometric registration, location tracking, stepped up police raids. In February 2026, the government went further. New legislation to deny work permits to low-income migrants, and a rule that migrant children must leave the country at 18 or qualify for their own permit. Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, the two countries that sent Russia workers for 30 years, have now publicly urged their citizens to think twice before going. Sit with that for a second. A country losing 600,000 people a year to natural decline alone is actively driving away the only inflow that was masking the loss. The Labour Minister told Putin directly, Russia will be short 11 million workers by 2030. At the end of 2024, companies were already missing over 2 million, and 70% of Russian firms reported labour shortages. The response? Recruiters flying to India, Pakistan and North Korea, trying to import replacement workers a decade after pushing out the ones next door. That's the first loop. Shortage, hostility, exodus, worse shortage. But it's not the biggest one, because in February 2022, the government took its own demographic crisis and poured gasoline on it. Now, let us talk about the triple blow. The war hit Russia's population from 3 directions at once. Direction 1, the men who left. September 21st, 2022. Putin announces partial mobilization. Within weeks, an estimated 500 to 700,000 Russian men flee the country. The border with Georgia backs up for miles. Flights to anywhere sell out in minutes. Total emigration since the invasion, somewhere between 800,000 and over 1 million people. Nobody knows exactly. That data went dark too. But one clue, roughly 700,000 Russians are now registered as living in Dubai, one city. And here's what matters, it wasn't a random sample. The ones who left were disproportionately young, educated, urban, IT workers, engineers, doctors. The exact people a shrinking country cannot afford to lose. The people who would have built the next economy and had the next children. Direction 2, the men who stayed and were sent. Russia doesn't publish its casualty numbers, but Western researchers have spent 4 years counting. The current estimates, somewhere between 790,000 and 1.4 million, killed and wounded. Deaths alone, as high as 450,000. For scale, that is roughly 4 times more fatalities than the United States has suffered in every war it has fought since World War II. Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, all of them combined. Times 4, the average age of these men, 35. Prime working years, prime fatherhood years. Direction 3, the children never born. The men who died won't have children. The million who fled will have them in Berlin, in Tbilisi, in Dubai. And the men who come home wounded, researchers expect waves of trauma, addiction and broken family formation for decades. The Economist added it up back in 2023, when this was 3 years younger than it is now. Russia had already lost around 2 million more people than it should have to war, disease, and exodus. And now the question the Kremlin really doesn't want asked. Which Russians are doing the dying? Who is really paying the price for this brutal war? Not Moscow. Casualty tracking by independent researchers shows the deaths fall overwhelmingly on Russia's poorest regions and its ethnic minorities, Buryatia, Tuva, Dagestan. Places most people watching this have never heard of. Republics thousands of miles from the capital, where a military contract is the only path out of poverty. Men from these regions die at rates many times higher than men from Moscow or St. Petersburg, where higher incomes, connections, and international options made avoiding service possible. Now, here's the cruel twist. Look at the birth rates. Tuva, 2.31 children per woman, one of the only regions in Russia above replacement. Buryatia, 1.52, well above the national average. These regions were Russia's demographic lifeline, the last places still producing the next generation. Those are the exact communities being emptied out on the front line. The state is spending its most fertile regions to protect its most powerful ones. The republics that were keeping Russia's population alive are being converted into casualties, while the capital that runs the war stays largely untouched. Minority soldiers have noticed. In their own words, reported across independent outlets, they increasingly describe themselves as cannon fodder. The receipts say they're not wrong. So how does a country with collapsing demographics keep filling the ranks? It buys them. Drive through a Russian town in 2026 and you'll see the billboards. Contract military service. Signing bonus from 6 million rubles. That's roughly $80,000, more than 4 times the average Russian annual salary, up front, for signing. Other offers go further, up to $140,000 in debt forgiveness. One analyst at the International Institute for Strategic Studies pointed out something remarkable. This is the first war in Russian history where the state is paying its citizens to fight instead of forcing them. But look at who's signing. By 2026, an estimated 40% of new recruits come from what researchers politely call vulnerable groups. Prisoners offered amnesty. Men drowning in debt offered relief. The desperate converted into infantry at market rate, and even that is no longer working. Recruitment fell 20% in the first quarter of 2026. The military needed 1,100 men a day. It's getting around 940. Word travels. The wounded sent back to the line, surrender discouraged by commanders, the bonuses that families collect instead of sons. So the recruiters have gone abroad. Targeted ads in Kazakhstan, pipelines from Africa, South Asia, Latin America. And at home, the state has gone younger. Child labor rules relaxed. 14-year-olds cleared for work, once considered too dangerous. Teenagers on drone assembly lines. One polytechnic ad features a girl named Darina, promising she'll earn $2,000 a month building attack drones. Her parents, she says, are proud. A shrinking country, paying its poorest men to die, recruiting its children to arm them. And in February 2026, the Health Ministry added one more policy: new official guidelines. Women who say they don't want children should be referred to psychotherapy to develop, quote, a positive attitude toward motherhood. That's where this is. The state can't convince its people to build families, so it's begun treating the refusal as a disorder. For 3 years, the Kremlin's entire strategy was attrition. Russia is bigger. Russia has more men. Trade lives for ground until Ukraine runs out first. In 2026, that math broke. Monthly Russian casualties 30 to 35,000. Monthly recruitment, roughly 27,000. For the first time in the war, Russia is now losing men faster than it can sign them, and the exchange rate is getting worse. In 2025, Russia paid about 120 casualties for every square kilometer it captured. In early 2026, over 300. Advances measured in meters per day, 50, 70, 90. Among the slowest rates of advance of any war in a century. Meanwhile, Ukraine, with its own severe manpower crisis, its own exhausted units, its own ugly conscription scandals, made a different bet. Machines instead of men. By 2026, drones account for 96% of Russian casualties. In May, Ukrainian drone operators reportedly killed or wounded more Russian soldiers than Russia recruited that month. One country is spending robots, the other is spending a generation. And that's the collision at the heart of this story. Russia entered this war because of its obsession with size, with population, with demographic destiny. Putin has called the collapse an existential threat for 2 decades. Analysts note that annexing Crimea added more Russians to Russia than any birth rate policy he ever launched. The war meant to reverse the decline is now the thing accelerating it. Back in Kolchugino, the maternity ward is closed. The nearest one is now a long drive away, on winter roads, in a region that keeps getting older. Multiply that town by thousands, across 11 time zones. One researcher put the end point into a single phrase. Russia's future, he said, is becoming a space without a people. The projections say 120 million by century's end. The war subtracts more every month. The young keep leaving. The births keep falling. And the government's answer, so far, has been to classify the evidence, pay the poor to die, and send unwilling mothers to therapy. Here's what nobody can answer. The math says this cannot continue. It's continuing anyway. A country can survive losing a war. Russia has done it before. But no country has ever won a war against its own arithmetic. And this is a state with 6,000 nuclear warheads, betting that it can. Maybe the system adapts, the way Russia always claims it does. Maybe it hollows out quietly for another generation. Or maybe, somewhere in those classified spreadsheets, there's a number that tells us exactly how much time is left, and someone in Moscow has already seen it. What do you think happens when a superpower runs out of people before it runs out of weapons? Let us know in the comments, and thanks for watching Below the Surface.